Before empires, before kingdoms, before the first wall was raised between field and steppe, the people of the Yellow River Basin understood one thing above all else: balance. They felt it in their bodies, the in-breath and the out-breath. They saw it in the world, the bright, warming sun and the cool, resting moon, the solid mountain and the flowing river, the firmness of earth and the softness of cloud. They called these two breaths yin and yang, not enemies but partners in an eternal, gentle dance. One could not exist without the other. Day required night. Growth required decay. From this dance arose an idea as vast as the sky itself, the mandate of heaven. It was not a crown to be seized, but a harmony to be maintained. The right to rule did not come from blood or sword alone. It came from virtue, from keeping the great dance in balance. A just ruler ensured the rains fell on time, the harvests were abundant, the people were secure, and the rituals to honor ancestors and gods were performed with a sincere heart. When a ruler became selfish, cruel, or neglectful, the balance would tip. The rivers might flood. Droughts might scorch the earth. The people's hearts would grow cold. This was heaven withdrawing its mandate. The dance was stumbling. The music was falling out of tune. This is where our story begins, not at a battle's climax, but in a moment of profound philosophical stillness. In the quiet of a scholar's study, in the whisper of the wind through bamboo in the inn, question of how to live, how to rule, and how to find peace in a world that seemed perpetually on the verge of tearing itself apart. We are listening for the two breaths in a time when the music of harmony was fading, and the land held its breath, waiting for a new, wiser song to begin. The dust of the road was fine and pale as ash. It coated the hem of his robes, filled the cracks in his worn sandals, and settled in the lines of his face, which was kind but etched with a deep, thoughtful weariness. His name was Confucius. The world would later call him Confucius. He was not a king. He was not a general. He carried no weapon but a walking staff, and his treasury was a small cart of bamboo scrolls. He walked from one small, war-torn state to another, followed by a handful of loyal disciples, young men, whose eyes burned with a hunger not for land, but for understanding. His mission was simple and impossible: to restore harmony. He believed the sickness of the age, the constant warfare between states, the corruption in courts, the fear in villages, came from a forgotten order, not the harsh order of laws and punishments, but the gentle, profound order of correct relationships, the love between father and son, the respect between ruler and subject, the trust between friends, the distinction between elder and younger, the mutuality between husband and wife. If each person understood their place in this web of relationships and acted with human-heartedness, benevolence, the family would be stable. If the family was stable, the village would be orderly. If the villages were orderly, the state would be strong and just. If the states were just, all under heaven would find peace. He would arrive at the gate of a minor lord's estate. He would be received, often with polite curiosity, sometimes with barely veiled impatience. They wanted strategies for victory, tricks for taxation, alliances of convenience. He spoke instead of music. "Tell me, Lord," he would say, his voice calm as a deep pool. "What tunes are played in your court? Are they the proper, balanced tones of the ancient rites, which calm the heart and order the spirit? Or are they the wild, exciting rhythms of Zeng, which stir the passions and lead men's minds astray?" The Lord would frown, confused. What did music have to do with power? Everything, the teacher would explain. Music was a microcosm of society. Harmonious music created harmonious people. Discordant music bred discord. He spoke of the Junzi, the exemplary person, the moral aristocrat. Not born noble, but made noble through relentless self-cultivation, study, and adherence to ritual. The Junzi was calm as a mountain, his mind clear, his actions always appropriate to the moment. He was the pillar upon which a peaceful world could be built. Most lords listened, nodded, and sent him on his way with a bag of rice, his ideas deemed beautiful, but useless for the brutal reality of the age. And so, Teacher Kong and his disciples would walk on, their shadows long on the dusty road, carrying the fragile seed of an idea that true power lay not in the sword, but in the cultivated heart, and that peace would never come from victory on the battlefield, but from righteousness in the human soul. In a modest courtyard of the small state of Lu, Confucius demonstrated his core philosophy not with a lecture, but with a ceremony. The disciples gathered. The object was simple, a bronze cup used in the ancestral rites. The young disciple, Zigong, eager and impulsive, reached for it. "Master, may I pour the water?" "Stop," Confucius said, not harshly, but with the firmness of a parent guiding a child's first steps. "First, tell me, when you approach the ritual vessel, what is in your heart?" Zigong hesitated. "Respect for the ancestors, Master. Is that a thought in your head, or a feeling in your body?" Confucius asked. "Before your hand moves, your intention must be settled. Your posture must be straight, but not stiff. Your breath must be even. Your gaze must be lowered, but your attention total. The ritual is not about the cup. It is about you. The cup is merely the mirror." He then performed the action himself. It was not dramatic. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. Lifting a cup, pouring a libation of water onto the earth. But every movement was infused with a profound, palpable attention. The way his sleeves fell, the angle of his wrist, the slow, deliberate pour, the quiet return of the cup to its mat. The air in the courtyard changed. The chirping of sparrows seemed to fade. The disciples felt it a sense of deep, resonant rightness. "This," Confucius said softly, looking at the damp spot on the earth, "is Li ritual propriety. It is not empty show. It is the physical form of reverence. It is the practice that trains the heart. By performing the correct outward action with full sincerity, we cultivate the correct inward feeling." "But Master," asked another disciple, Yan Hui, his brow furrowed, "in times of war and chaos, when states are collapsing, what use is the proper way to hold a cup?" Confucius turned his gentle eyes on his favorite student. "It is of the highest use. When the world is in disorder, it is because the rituals have broken down. Rulers no longer perform the ceremonies to heaven with true hearts. Sons no longer honor fathers. Subjects no longer respect rulers. We cannot fix the great disorders if we do not first master the small order. If a man cannot pour a cup of water with reverence, how can he govern a city with justice? If he cannot govern his own body and mind in this courtyard, how can he bring peace to a kingdom? The ritual," he concluded, his hand resting lightly on the cool bronze, "is the anchor. In a storm-tossed sea, you must first secure your own boat. This cup, this moment, this breath of focused respect, this is how we begin to secure the world. We start here. We start now. We start with the cup." The disciples sat in silence, the lesson settling into them deeper than any discourse on battle tactics. They understood now. The Master's way was not a quick path to power. It was a lifelong journey of polishing the self one perfect ritual movement at a time, hoping that such small, steadfast acts of harmony might, like a pebble dropped in a pond, send ripples of order out into a world drowning in chaos. Far to the west, in the mist-shrouded peaks where the world seemed to soften into cloud, an old man named Li An-on as Laozi, the Old Master, served as the keeper of the imperial archives in the Zhou court. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by scrolls, by words, by the frantic human scribbling towards order, and he had grown weary of it all. One evening, as the cicadas sang their metallic song and the scent of rain-wet pine filled the air, he sat before a block of untouched hanging wood. It was meant to be carved into a statue for the temple. He looked at it, its grains swirling like a captured storm, its surface rough and full of potential. He saw not raw material, but perfection. This, he thought, is the Pu, the uncarved block. In its natural state, it is whole, complete, at peace. What does the carver do? He imposes his own idea. He cuts away what does not fit his design. He creates something beautiful, according to human rules, but in doing so, he destroys its natural, effortless integrity. He trades wholeness for a concept. This was the flaw he saw in Confucius's earnest quest. All that talk of ritual, of duty, of cultivation, it was all carving. It was forcing the natural, flowing wood of humanity into rigid moral shapes. It created friction, effort, and ultimately, hypocrisy. Laozi believed in the Tao, the way, not a path to be built with rules, but the fundamental, flowing order of the universe itself, as natural and effortless as water finding its course downhill, as a tree growing toward the sun without being told. The sage, he believed, did not act upon the world. He followed it. He practiced Wei Wei non-action, or action without striving, like a reed bending in the wind, never breaking. The true ruler, he mused, would be so still, so in tune with the Tao, that his people would hardly know he existed. They would simply live naturally and well, believing their good fortune to be of their own making. This was the opposite of the legalist's controlling hand, or the Confucian's guiding ritual. It was the art of getting out of the way. Tired of the court's petty intrigues and the decay of the Qin Dynasty, Laozi decided to leave civilization behind. He saddled a black ox, a beast of patient strength and slow pace. As he prepared to pass through the western gate of the kingdom, the gatekeeper Yin Shi, who recognized the sage, stopped him. "You are leaving the world of men, master. Will you not leave behind your wisdom?" Laozi, looking at the endless road ahead and the green mountains beyond, nodded. For 3 days he sat in the gatehouse, and he wrote, not a long treatise, but a short, dense, poetic text of just over 5,000 characters. He called it the Dao Di Jing, the classic of the way and virtue. He wrote of water, the softest thing, which yet wears away the hardest stone. He wrote of the usefulness of the empty space within a bowl, of the doorway, of the valley. He wrote that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but that the wise traveler arrives without haste. He warned that the more laws and taboos there are, the poorer the people become. The more sharp weapons men have, the greater the chaos in the realm. When he finished, he gave the scrolls to the gatekeeper. Then, without another word, he mounted his black ox and passed through the gate. He faded into the western mists, becoming less a man and more a legend, a whisper of an alternative path, one that asked not for harder striving, but for deeper listening, not for carving the block, but for appreciating its untouched, silent, and perfect wholeness. Years after Laozi's departure, his most brilliant follower, Zhuangzi, lay dreaming by the banks of the Hao River. The sun was warm on his back, the sound of the current a constant soothing murmur. He awoke not with a start, but with a slow smile. He had dreamed he was a butterfly, a joyous, fluttering thing, unaware of anything called Yuanzi. Upon waking, he was puzzled. Now I do not know whether I was then a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or whether I am now a butterfly dreaming I am a man. This, to him, was not confusion, but liberation. It revealed the arbitrariness of rigid categories, the fluidity of all things. He saw the world not as Confucius did, a network of fixed relationships to be maintained, but as a magnificent, ever-changing, playful transformation, the Tao at play. He rose and walked along the riverbank. He saw fishermen with their nets struggling against the current, their faces grim with effort. Farther down, he saw an old man simply floating on his back, allowing the river to carry him, a look of serene bliss on his face. Zhuangzi laughed aloud. This was the lesson. This was Wu Wei in action. He later told the story of a cook named Ding who butchered oxen for a lord. His knife, after 19 years, was as sharp as if new from the grindstone. The lord asked his secret. "Your servant," said Cook Ding, "is devoted to the Tao, which is beyond mere skill. When I first began, I saw the whole ox. After 3 years, I no longer saw the whole ox. Now I meet it with my spirit, not my eyes. My senses stop and my spirit moves as it wills. I follow the natural contours, the great cavities, the main hollows. I guide my knife through the inherent apertures, navigating the great complexities. I never touch a ligament or tendon, much less a main joint. I take what is already there. A good cook changes his knife once a year he cuts. An average cook changes his knife once a month he hacks. My knife has lasted 19 years because I find the spaces. The Lord understood. Cook Ding did not fight the ox. He followed its Tao. He flowed with the inherent structure, applying minimal, perfect force at the perfect point. Zhuangzi applied this to life and statcraft. Why wage brutal war to conquer a state, hacking at it, ruining your own blade, the army, the people in the process? Why not understand its natural contours, the desires of its people, the strengths of its land, the rhythm of its society, and find the space where harmony, not conquest, is possible? True power was not in forceful action, but in perceptive alignment. It was the difference between the swimmer thrashing against the current and the old man floating, cradled by it, arriving at his destination without a single stroke of struggle. While Confucius spoke of graded love and Laozi of effortless flow, a third voice rose in the land, one of sharp, practical, and radical love. The man was Mo Di, later called Mozi. A former follower of Confucian teachings, he had grown disillusioned. He saw the elaborate, costly funerals Confucius advocated as a waste that impoverished the living. He saw the focus on family loyalty as the root of nepotism and conflict. Why care only for your own state, your own clan? In a shaded grove of jujube trees, their branches heavy with green fruit, Mozi gathered his disciples, who wore plain clothes of undyed hemp and practiced fierce austerity. They were not scholars, but engineers of morality. The Confucians, Mozi declared, his voice not melodic like Confucius's, but clear and logical as a bell. Speak of Ren humaneness, but they limit it. It is a love that weakens with distance. You love your father more than a stranger. You love your state more than a neighboring state. This partial love is the cause of all the world's strife. He paused, letting the hum of cicadas fill the space. We must practice Qin Dynasty, he said. Universal, impartial love. You must care for the stranger's father as you do your own. You must care for another state as you do your own. If all under heaven did this, who would attack their neighbor? Who would exploit the weak? The strong would help the weak. The wealthy would aid the poor. Chaos would turn to harmony, not through ritual, but through calculation. A Confucian disciple, having heard of this heresy, had come to debate. Master Mo, he challenged. Your idea is impossible. It is against human nature. Can you truly love a man from distant CHU as you love your own brother? Mozi did not argue from emotion. He argued like a mathematician proving a theorem. What is the purpose of a moral principle? He asked. Is it not to create benefit and eliminate harm? Let us test both ideas. Imagine a world run on partial love. States fight, families feud. The world is a battlefield. Now imagine a world run on universal love. States trade, families help one another. The world is a family. Which world would you choose to live in? Any rational person would choose the latter. Therefore, universal love is the correct principle. We must choose it, and through practice and reason, make it our nature. His argument was revolutionary. Morality was not about tradition or ineffable inner cultivation. It was a social technology for maximizing benefit. His followers became activists. They would travel to a state about to launch a costly, aggressive war and demonstrate with scales and models how it would ruin the treasury and bleed the people, how it was irrational. They became masters of defensive warfare, designing clever siege engines and fortifications, not to conquer, but to make conquest so costly that aggressive rulers would be deterred. For them, peace was not a mystical harmony, but a practical engineering project built on the unshakable foundation of logical, universal care. Word reached Mozi that the great state of Sichu had finished building a terrifying new siege weapon, a cloud ladder so vast and cleverly engineered it could scale any wall, and was preparing to attack the small, weak state of Song. Mozi did not send a petition. He did not give a speech. He walked. For 10 days and nights he marched, his leather sandals wearing thin, his disciple Qin Dynasty struggling to keep pace with the master's urgent stride. Dust caked their robes. They slept in ditches, ate dry grain. Their mission was not to lead an army, but to perform a demonstration. They arrived in the magnificent, arrogant court of Chu. The king and his master engineer, Gongshu Ban, received them with bemused curiosity. I hear you have a machine that can defeat Song's walls, Mozi said, dispensing with all ceremony. I have come to show you that Song is already prepared. He laid his leather toolkit on the floor. From it he took belts, buckles, and blocks of wood. Before the astonished court, he and Chen Guli began to construct a model city on the polished stone floor. With swift, precise movements, they built miniature walls, gates, and towers. Now, Mozi said to Gongshu Ban, simulate your famous attack. Use your cloud ladder. Take my model city. The engineer, proud of his invention, accepted. He used sticks and strings to simulate the assault. For 9 successive attempts, Mosey demonstrated a countermeasure, pouring boiling sand, knocking away ladders with pivoting beams, dropping weighted nets. Each time the attack failed, Gongshu Ban's tricks were exhausted. "I have one final stratagem," he said, a gleam in his eye. "And I have its defense ready," Mosey replied, calm and unwavering. The king, watching this silent, intense pantomime of attack and defense, finally held up his hand. He understood. The brilliance of Mosey's defensive designs meant that taking Song would be a long, bloody, and costly siege, draining Sichu's resources for little gain. "Very well," the king sighed. "The attack is called off," but Mosey was not finished. On his long walk back, he passed through Song. It was a rainy night, dark and miserable. The guards at the gate, huddled under eaves, had no idea who he was or what he had just done for them. They did not let him take shelter. He stood in the downpour, shivering. His disciple Qin Guli was furious. "Master, after saving them, this is how they treat you?" Mosey, water streaming down his face, smiled his rare, thin smile. "If I had been recognized and given shelter, it would have been a reward. But to practice Jian is to do what is right without expectation of reward or recognition, to help others simply because it is a benefit to all. The guard's ignorance is irrelevant. The city is saved. That is the benefit. That is enough." He walked on into the dark, wet night, a perfect embodiment of his own philosophy, the consummate engineer of peace, whose tools were logic models and an impartial love so profound it asked for nothing, not even a dry place to sleep in return. In the western state of Qin, a land of harsh winds, tough people, and a culture that valued the practical over the poetic, a different kind of thinker found fertile ground. His name was Xiang Yang. He had no interest in benevolence, ritual, or universal love. To him, these were the delusions of a dying age, the pretty lies that made men weak and states vulnerable. He stood before Duke Zhao of Qin, not with scrolls of philosophy, but with a ledger of human behavior, reduced to its most basic drivers, fear and desire. "Your Grace," Xiang Yang's voice was as sharp as a newly minted coin. "The people are like water. They will flow to follow the easiest path, seeking personal advantage. Your task is not to educate their hearts, but to channel their flow with unbreakable dikes of law. Make the path to personal advantage identical to the path that strengthens the state." His system, legalism, was chillingly simple. It viewed the people as raw material for state power. The ruler was the sculptor, the laws his chisels, and punishment his primary tool. "There must be collective responsibility," he dictated as scribes recorded his words onto bamboo strips that would become the Qin legal code. If one man commits a crime and his neighbors do not report him, they shall be cut in two at the waist. Reward must be certain, but small. Punishment must be certain and terrible. He abolished the old aristocracy of birth. In its place, he created an aristocracy of merit, but merit defined solely by one thing: success in war or agriculture. He instituted a system of 18 grades of rank. The only way to rise was to bring an enemy head from the battlefield, or to produce an exceptional surplus of grain. Your rank determined the size of your house, the clothes you could wear, even the trees you could plant in your courtyard. He standardized measurements. He broke up powerful clans by forcing adult sons to establish separate households. He made the state the sole owner of all land, granting use only to those who served its purposes. The sound of Qin changed. It was no longer the debate of scholars or the chant of rituals. It was the thud of the tax collector's measure on a standardized bushel of grain. It was the clank of ranked badges being awarded for sacks of enemy heads. It was the silent, terrified vigilance of neighbors watching neighbors, knowing a single misstep could bring mutual ruin. Xiang Yang's ledger balanced perfectly. Fear of horrific punishment suppressed crime. Greed for rank and reward fueled production and conquest. The individual soul, with its messy Confucian filial piety or its Mohist universal love, was irrelevant, a hindrance even. The only thing that mattered was the sum total of state power, recorded in the ledger's columns: bushels of grain, heads of enemies, acres of cleared land. Under the cold, clear logic of the ledger, Qin did not just grow stronger. It transformed into a machine of terrifying, singular purpose. While Xiang Yang built his machine of state, another man, in the service of the state of Wu, was perfecting the manual for its most critical function: warfare. His name was Sun Wu, known as Sun Tzu. But his great text, The Art of War, was not about battle. It was about victory without battle. He was invited to demonstrate his theories to the king of Wu. The king, skeptical, demanded a test. "Can you apply your principles to women?" "I can," Sun Tzu replied. The king sent him 180 concubines from his palace. Sun Tzu divided them into 2 companies and appointed the king's 2 favorite concubines as captains. He explained the drills, right turn, left turn, about face, as simply as possible. He gave the order. The women giggled. Sun Tzu said, "If instructions are not clear, if commands are not understood, it is the fault of the general." He repeated the instructions. He gave the order again. The women giggled louder. Sun Tzu's face became stone. If instructions are clear and commands are understood, and the soldiers still do not obey, it is the fault of the officers. He turned to the king's scribe. According to military law, what is the punishment for an officer who fails to execute an order after it has been made clear? "Death, general," the scribe stammered. Sun Tzu ordered the execution of the 2 captains. The king, watching from a pavilion, was aghast. "I see you are a capable general. I cannot do without these 2 ladies. Please spare them." Sun Tzu did not look up. "I have been appointed commander. While in command, I am not bound by the ruler's orders." He had the 2 women beheaded. He appointed 2 new captains and drilled the companies again. This time they moved in perfect, silent unison, turning with precision, their faces pale with terror. They would have marched into fire or water without hesitation. Sun Tzu turned to the king. "The troops are now properly led. Your Majesty may put them to any use. They will not falter." The king, though heartsick, understood the lesson in its brutal purity. This was the core of Sun Tzu's philosophy. War is a grave affair of state. It must be based on absolute, unambiguous authority and ruthless discipline. But its ultimate goal is to win without fighting. The rest of his book unfolded this paradox. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. To do this, one must know oneself and the enemy perfectly. One must be formless, like water, adapting to the enemy's shape. One must attack strategies first, alliances next, armies last. One must win the war in the planning room before a single soldier marches. Deception was paramount. All warfare is based on deception. When able, feign inability. When active, feign inactivity. To Sun Tzu, the bloody clash of armies was a failure of strategy. The ideal victory was the one where the enemy's will was broken, his alliances shattered, and his city's gates opened, all before the first arrow was knocked. His book was not a celebration of violence, but a chillingly rational guide to rendering violence unnecessary through superior psychology, politics, and positioning. It was the perfect complement to Xiang Yang's machine. The engine of the state now had its precise operating manual for external conflict, one that valued efficiency and finality over glory and heroism. War II was to be entered into the ledger, and the most profitable entry was the one with the lowest cost. A century before the philosophies crystallized, the great state of Qin had been the hegemon, the peacekeeper of the Central Plains. But peace, like an untended garden, can grow wild and strangling roots. Within the ruling house of Qin, 6 mighty aristocratic families, the Zhao, Wei, Han, Zi, Fan, and Zhang had grown so powerful in land, wealth, and private armies that they dwarfed the nominal duke himself. The state was not 1, but 7. The air in the Qin capital was thick with the scent of blossoms and conspiracy. In lavish courtyards shaded by ancient cypress trees, the heads of these families met, not in open court, but in private chambers. The clink of wine cups was a mask for the silent language of sidelong glances and measured pauses. The leader of the most powerful family, Zbo of the Ji clan, was a man of brilliant ambition and fatal arrogance. He possessed a mind like a diamond, sharp, brilliant, and cold. He saw the 6 families not as kin, but as pieces on a wakey board. One by one, he began to demand gifts of land from the others, a test of loyalty and a prelude to absorption. To the heads of the Han and Wei families, he sent messengers. A strip of your borderlands as a token of our friendship. The demands were framed as requests, but the armored retinue standing behind the messenger spoke the true language. The Han and Wei lords, fearful of Zibo's might, consulted their advisors in hushed, panicked tones. If we refuse, he will attack us now and we are weak, whispered the Han minister. If we give it, he will grow stronger and demand more later. Trapped, they chose the later danger over the immediate one. They sliced off the land, their seals pressing into the silk maps with the finality of a self-inflicted wound. Emboldened, Ziba turned to the Xiao family. He made the same demand of their most fertile valley. The Zhao patriarch, Xiangzi, was of a different temper. Where others saw a chess piece, he saw a principle. He received the demand in his austere hall, his face impassive. His advisors, pale, urged compliance. My lord, the Zi are a mountain. We are but a hill. We cannot withstand them. Xiangzi looked at the messenger, then at the grove of bamboo outside his window, bending but not breaking in the wind. Land is the legacy of our ancestors, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. It is not mine to give away to feed another's hunger. I did not receive it so that I might surrender it out of fear. Tell your master, the Zhao answer is no. The gasp in the room was audible. It was not just a refusal of land. It was a refusal of the new, brutal logic of the age. It was a single note of defiance in a symphony of submission. The messenger left. The die was cast. Zibo, his pride wounded and his strategy challenged, assembled the armies of the Han and Wei, who were now bound to him by their own earlier cowardice, and marched on the Zhao stronghold of Jinyang. The refusal in the courtyard was the spark. The siege of Jinyang would be the fire. And from that fire, the old world of fractured aristocracy would burn away, leaving ashes from which the first true empire would, painfully, begin to grow. The discord was sown. The harvest would be unimaginable blood, and a unity forged not in loyalty, but in absolute, terrifying conquest. The siege of Jinyang lasted 3 years. The Zhao, trapped within their high walls, fought with the desperation of badgers in a hole. They ran out of grain, then boiled their leather shields and armor for soup, but they did not break. The end came not from without, but from within the alliance of the besiegers. ZBO, to celebrate his impending victory and showcase his power, hosted a feast on a dam he had constructed to flood Jinyang's walls. He drank deeply from a golden goblet, his arrogance reaching its zenith. He turned to the lords of Han and Wei, who sat beside him, their faces tense. "See?" he boomed, gesturing at the drowning city. "I now know how a state can be destroyed by water. What? Have you never considered that your own capitals are vulnerable to such a fate?" A silent, frozen glance passed between the Han and Wei lords. In that moment they saw their own future. Once Zhao was crushed, they would be next. The cold fear that had made them submit to ZBO now crystallized into a colder resolve. That night, under cover of a torrential rain that masked their movements, messengers from Han and Wei slipped into Jinyang. They found Xiangzi, gaunt but unbroken. The deal was struck in whispers. Zhao, Han, and Wei would turn on ZBO together. The next day, as Zibo's army slept, confident in its victory, the sluice gates of the dam were secretly turned. The waters that had besieged Jinyang now roared back toward the Z camp. In the chaos of the sudden flood, the Zhao gates burst open, and here the sound of warfare changed forever. For centuries the nobility had fought from chariots elegant, rattling platforms of wood and bronze, pulled by teams of horses, driven by a driver and bearing an archer and a spearman. It was the weapon of aristocrats, a mobile throne from which to command and kill with ceremony. But the streets of the flooded camp were mud and chaos. The chariots, symbols of an older, more honorable war, became death traps. Their wheels stuck fast in the mire. Their proud drivers were shot down by Zhao crossbowmen, firing from the walls a new weapon, requiring less training than the composite bow, able to be wielded by a commoner to kill a nobleman at 100 paces. The chariot's last ride was a short, stumbling, ignoble struggle in the mud. The age of the aristocratic warrior, fighting according to ritualized codes, died there in the sucking clay. In its place rose the age of the mass infantry army, armed with standardized crossbows and long pikes, led by meritocratic generals, not noble lords. It was the perfect military expression of the legalist state, impersonal, efficient, and utterly devastating. ZBO was captured. As a final insult and a grim lesson, his skull was lacquered and turned into a drinking cup by the victorious Xiangzi. The 3 victorious families, Zhao, Han, and Wei, then carved up the vast lands of Jin between them. In 403 BC, the Zhou king, powerless to stop it, was forced to recognize them as independent states. The partition of Jin was complete. The delicate balance of the Zhou feudal system was shattered. The Warring States period had truly begun, and its battlefields would no longer be stages for chariot-borne heroes, but grinding machines of conquest where the new philosophies of order, of war, of control would be tested in rivers of blood and fire. In the aftermath of Jinyang, the battlefield fell silent. but for a new sounded dry, mechanical click, like the cocking of a terrible metal insect. It was the sound of the triple-bolt crossbow being armed. This was not the weapon of a hero. It required no great strength, no lifetime of archery practice. A peasant could be taught to load, aim, and release its murderous power in a matter of days. The states, now locked in a death struggle, became laboratories for military engineering. In the state of Chu, artisans and smoky foundries perfected bronze trigger mechanisms that were both precise and mass-producible. In Qi, strategists calculated the perfect arrowhead shape to penetrate the new laminated leather armor. The crossbow turned warfare into a democratic nightmare. A single, well-placed bolt from an unseen commoner in a trench could end the life of a noble general on his horse, a world away. The sound of the click changed the psychology of war. Battles were no longer preceded by the thunder of chariot charges and the shouted challenges of champions. They began with an eerie, rustling silence from the enemy lines, broken only by thousands of sequential clicks as formations armed their weapons. Then a sky-darkening hiss of released bolts, a sound of impersonal industrial death. The age of individual martial glory was buried under a hail of standardized projectiles. War was no longer confined to the battlefield. It flowed into the marble corridors of palaces and the silk-hung chambers of ministers. The most valuable weapon became information. A man known only as Sun Tzu perfected the art. A consummate actor and strategist, he arrived at the court of Qi not as a diplomat, but as a fugitive, his clothes torn, his face etched with pretended fear. He threw himself before the king of Qi. "Great king," he gasped, his performance flawless. "I bring terrible news. The state of Qin in the west, having swallowed the lands of Ba and Shu, now sharpens its swords for an eastern advance. They speak of nothing but conquering the rich lands of Qi. I barely escaped with my life." The king of Qi, a man prone to both greed and paranoia, was alarmed. Sun Tzu, the fugitive, was given shelter, then a minor advisory post. For months, he was the model of grateful loyalty, offering subtle counsel that always seemed to benefit Qi. He shared secrets of other states, weaknesses secrets carefully fabricated by his true masters. He studied everything: the layout of the granaries, the temperament of the generals, the king's daily routine, which concubine whispered in his ear at night. He noted the rivalries between ministers, and with exquisite skill he widened them, dropping a careless comment here, a forged document there. His goal was not to destroy Qi from within, but to misalign it. He convinced the king to attack the state of Song, a costly and distracting venture, by painting it as a rich prize and an easy victory. He subtly discouraged alliances with Zhao and Wei, sowing seeds of distrust. He made the state's policies erratic, its resources misspent, its friendships broken. After 2 years, having successfully weakened Qi's strategic position and diverted its attention, Sun Tzu vanished one night as silently as he had arrived. He left behind a court riven with suspicion, a treasury depleted by a pointless war, and a king who trusted no one. The damage he wrought was greater than any army could have achieved in a season of campaigning. He had proven that the most critical terrain in the warring states was not a mountain pass or a river ford, but the mind of the ruler. The war of spies was a shadow war, fought with whispers and lies, where the ultimate victory was to make your enemy defeat himself long before your armies ever marched. Not all war was fought between kings. In the villages, war was a simpler, more desperate thing. It was about water. A village on the disputed border between Wei and Zhao had but one deep, sweet well. For generations, families from both sides had drawn from it in an uneasy, wordless truce. Then a new magistrate was appointed to the Wei side, a petty, ambitious man who saw the well not as a source of life, but as a token of power. He ordered a wall built around the Wei half of the well with a locked gate. Only Wei families, with permits stamped by his office, could draw water. The Zhao villagers, facing drought, sent elders to protest. They were turned away by guards. The next day, a Zhao boy, desperate for his family's sick goat, tried to sneak to the well at dawn. A Wei guard, nervous and zealous, struck him with the butt of his spear. The boy fell, cracking his head on the stone coping of the well. That afternoon, the boy's father and uncles came, not with petitions, but with hay forks and wood axes. The Wei guards met them. It was not a battle. It was a brutal, silent brawl in the dust by the water source. 2 men died, one from Zhao, one from Wei. Retaliation spiraled. A Wei cow was found hamstrung. A Zhao granary was burned. The local garrison commanders, minor nobles from each state, were now obligated to respond or lose face. A dozen bored, armored soldiers from Wei arrived to restore order. They were ambushed in a narrow lane by Zhao, villagers and militiamen from the next town. The skirmish was reported upward as a Zhao incursion. The Zhao commander reported a Wei atrocity. Petty lords seeking favor with their kings saw a chance for a cheap, localized victory. They sent companies of troops. Within a month, what began with a locked gate was a full-scale military engagement. 2,000 men clashed in the valley where the village once stood. The well itself was destroyed in the fighting, collapsed by a stray catapult stone. The village was ash. The fields were trampled. The kings of Wei and Zhao, when they heard of the Battle of the Black Well, barely noted it. It was a minor border adjustment in their grand strategies. But for the people who lived there, it was the end of the world. The siege of the well was a tiny, perfect model of the warring states period. A small insult, magnified by pride and the rigid machinery of escalating retaliation, leading to utter, pointless ruin. It proved that the philosophies of the great thinkers meant nothing when a man in a uniform was given a little power over something as simple as water. The great families, having destroyed Jin, now turned on each other with familial intimacy that made their hatred all the more venomous. In the state of Zhao, the Lian Po clan and the Zhao Sheng clan were locked in a power struggle that threatened to tear the state apart from the inside. The conflict came to a head in a coup and a massacre. The Lian Po faction won, storming the Zhao Sheng palace. They killed every man, woman, and child they could find, determined to extinguish the bloodline. As soldiers ransacked the nursery, a loyal physician, Cheng Yang, managed to smuggle out one treasure, the infant son of the slain Zhao Sheng, still in swaddling clothes. The weight of the child was the weight of a dynasty, of a future revenge, of a terrible secret. Cheng Ying knew he could not hide the orphan of Zhao alone. He went to the one man the new regime would never suspect, Gongsun Chuju, an elderly, retired courtier of impeccable reputation, known for his neutrality and his love of quiet scholarship. Cheng Ying laid the sleeping infant before the old man. He did not need to explain. The blood staining the swaddling cloth spoke for itself. Gongsun Chuju looked from the child to the physician. His face, a map of wrinkles, showed no fear, only a profound, weary sorrow. He knew what was being asked. To save the orphan, someone else's child must die in its place, and the secret must be buried under layers of sacrifice, so convincing that not a shred of doubt remained. Cheng Ying offered his own newborn son. The plan was an agonizing theater of betrayal. Cheng Ying went to the authorities and exposed Gongsun Chuju as the traitor hiding the orphan. Soldiers raided the old man's estate. They found an infant hidden in the wall. Gongsun Chuju, refusing to flee, cursed Cheng Ying's treachery with his dying breath before being cut down. The soldiers took the infant, Cheng Ying's own son, and dashed its head against the stone courtyard floor, believing the Zhao line was ended. Cheng Ying, hailed as a hero by the new regime for his loyalty, was given the horrific task of raising the son of a servant in the very palace of the men who had slaughtered his true family. For 15 years he lived as a celebrated traitor, nurturing the orphan, Xiao Wu, with stories of his true father as nobility and the monstrous injustice that needed to be set right. He fed the boy on a diet of hidden history and silent rage. The story of the orphan became legend. It was a tale of the ultimate Confucian virtues, loyalty, righteousness, filial piety, pushed to a horrifying extreme. It asked, what is the true cost of preserving a life, of fulfilling a duty? The answer was written in the blood of 2 innocent children and the broken heart of a man who had to live a lie so perfect it consumed his soul, all for the sake of a future reckoning that hung on the fragile thread of a boy's memory. It was war waged not on battlefields, but in nurseries and in the human heart, proving that in this age even the purest love had to be armored in unimaginable sacrifice. In the state of Qin, the legalist machine needed fuel. Its fuel was grain. An army of 1 million conscripts, mobilized by Shangyang's laws of reward and punishment, could not march on empty stomachs. The fertile plain of Guanzhong was Qin's breadbasket, but it was dry, dependent on fickle rains. A brilliant, weary engineer from the state of Han, Senghua, arrived at the court of Qin with a proposal. He was an enemy sent by a Han king desperate to drain Qin's resources in a pointless public works project. His plan was audacious: to cut a canal 300 li long from the jade-blue waters of the Jing River to the arid plains of Guanzhong. The Qin ministers, smelling a trick, were skeptical. The labor, the time. It will consume a generation of our men and our treasure, they argued. But the young king of Qin, Ying Zhang, the future first emperor, saw further. He saw past the immediate cost to the eternal yield. He gave the order. For 10 years, the project was a colossal sigh of human effort. A workforce of hundreds of thousands, conscripted by the very laws that fueled Qin's wars, moved mountains of earth. The sound was not of battle, but of a deeper, more fundamental struggle. The thud of countless spades, the groan of ox-drawn sledges, the foreman's shouts, the endless, mournful work songs that held the rhythm of despair and hope. Men died by the thousands from exhaustion, from rockfalls, from disease in the crowded, filthy labor camps. The canal was a river of sweat and bone. Zheng Guo, the saboteur, oversaw it all. But as the years passed, a strange alchemy occurred. The spy became an artist. The canal was no longer just a trick. It was his masterpiece. He solved impossible problems of gradient and erosion. He designed ingenious sluice gates and diversion channels. He fell in love with the sheer, stubborn will of the earth and water. Halfway through, the Qin court discovered his original purpose as a spy. They dragged him before the king, demanding his execution. Zheng Guo, covered in the mud of his life's work, did not plead for mercy. He said, "Your Majesty, I was indeed sent to exhaust Qin, but though the canal prolongs the work, it will prolong the benefits for Qin 10,000-fold. It will create 40,000 Qing, a fertile land. It will feed your armies forever. I have given your enemy a temporary respite, but I have given Qin an eternal weapon." King Yingzheng, silent as a mountain, stared at the engineer. He saw not a spy, but a tool that even in its intended betrayal had created something of immense value. He saw the legalist logic fulfilled. The intention was irrelevant. The result was everything. "Finish the canal," the king decreed. When the waters finally surged through the last channel, transforming the gray dust of Guanchong into a shimmering sea of green millet and wheat, it was the quietest, most profound victory of the age. The Zhengguo Canal did not conquer a city. It conquered hunger. It turned the arid heart of Qin into a perennial granary. The spy's trick had backfired spectacularly, gifting his enemy with the very means to achieve ultimate conquest. The canal became the empire's silent, life-giving artery, proving that the most powerful siege engine was not a tower or a ram, but a controlled flow of water, and that true power grew not just from the sword, but from the irrigated seed. In the vast arsenal of Xianyang, the Qin capital, the sound was a cacophony of frustrated carpenters and the screech of ill-fitting wood. War carts from the conquered regions of Siyu had axles too wide for the roads of Qin. Supply wagons from Han had axles too narrow. In the heat of a campaign, a broken axle could mean a lost baggage train, a stranded company, a failed siege. The legalist minister Li Si, the intellectual heir to Xianyang, saw this not as a nuisance, but as a flaw in the system. The state was a machine. A machine required interchangeable parts. He issued an edict, backed by the terrifying authority of Qin law. Henceforth, all wheeled vehicles in the empire would have axles of a standard length. Not approximately, precisely. State inspectors, armed with bronze measuring rods, would travel to every cartwright's workshop. A cart with an axle off by the width of a rice grain would be confiscated. The cartwright would be fined a month's grain ration. A second offense meant conscription into the frontier labor corps. At first, the decree seemed a petty tyranny. Old masters whose families had crafted axles by the feel of their forearms for generations cursed the soulless state. They were artists, not assemblers, but slowly the miracle revealed itself. On the newly built arrow-straight Qin highways, the Yidao supply trains now moved with relentless fluid efficiency. A cart from the northern grasslands could exchange its broken wheel with a cart from the southern rice paddies. The grooves worn into the stone roads by millions of passages became uniform, smooth, and fast. The speed of mobilization, of communication, of trade increased exponentially. The standardization of the axle was a silent, mundane revolution. It was the physical manifestation of legalist philosophy, the suppression of local variation, of individual artistry in service of monolithic systemic power. It turned the diverse, chaotic material of the conquered states into a unified, functional component of the Qin machine. The empire was not just being built with walls and laws. It was being built with precise measurements, with the unyielding logic of the workshop applied to an entire civilization. The screech of friction gave way to the smooth, rolling hum of perfect utility, a sound more terrifying in its quiet efficiency than any battle cry, for it signaled the end of a world of local difference and the dawn of an empire of seamless, controlled unity. The unification was complete. The 6 warring states were now provinces of Qin. King Yingzheng declared himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first August Emperor of Qin. The machine was built. Now he needed to ensure it ran forever, with no ghost of the past to clog its gears. His chancellor, Li Si, the architect of standardization, identified the greatest threat. Not rebel armies, they could be crushed. The threat was memory, the dangerous, seductive memory of how things were before. It lived in the bamboo and silk scrolls that filled private libraries and scholar-ass halls, the odes of Confucius that spoke of benevolent rulers of old, the histories of other states that recorded Qin's brutal ascent, the philosophical debates that questioned the very foundations of legalist authority. Li Si presented his infamous memorial. His words were calm, logical, and utterly chilling. "Your Majesty," he said, "the scholars do not study your laws and ordinances. They study the old texts in order to criticize the present, to confuse the black-headed people, and to spread dissent. If this is not prohibited, your authority will be weakened and factions will form below." He proposed a simple, total solution. Burn them. An edict went out, carried by swift riders to every commandery, every county, every village. All books of history, save the dry Qin annals. All poetry, save utilitarian manuals. All philosophical works of the 100 schools of thought, Confucian, Mohist, Taoist, were to be gathered by the local magistrates and burned in the public square. Only practical texts on agriculture, medicine, divination, and the law were to be spared. The sound of knowledge dying was the crackle of 1,000 bonfires, lighting the night sky across the empire. In the capital Xianyang, the greatest pyre of all was built. Scholars were forced to carry their own libraries to the flames. The heat was immense, warping the air. The smell was not of wood, but of baked clay from the stylus tablets, and the sickly sweet scent of burning silk scrolls. Ash like black snow fell for days, but memory is a tenacious thing. Some scholars, their hearts breaking, hid precious texts in the walls of their houses, in false-bottomed carts, in the lining of coffins. They memorized entire classics, becoming living libraries, whispering the forbidden texts to their sons in the dead of night, and trusting the words not to silk, but to breath and blood. The burning of the books was not just an act of censorship. It was an attempt at chronicide, the murder of time itself. The emperor sought to create a nation with no past, only a present of obedience and a future he alone would dictate. It was the ultimate expression of legalist control. The mind itself was to be standardized, its grooves worn smooth by state doctrine, leaving no room for the dangerous, branching paths of alternative thought. The fires of Xianyang were meant to be a final, clarifying light, but they cast the longest shadow of all, a shadow of lost wisdom, of cultural amnesia, and of a desperate underground struggle to keep a stolen flame alive. Long before the burning, before the great canal, there was just a boy in a palace that was more cage than home. Yingzheng was 13 when his father, the king of Qin, died. The throne was his, but the power was held by a regent, Lai Buwei, a merchant of staggering wealth and ambition who had been his father's advisor and, rumor whispered, his mother's lover. The boy king's world was a gilded labyrinth of whispers. Courtiers bowed with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. His mother, the Dueja queen, was sequestered in her own quarters, her reputation a source of scandal. Lei Buwei ruled with a velvet fist, his policies brilliant, his network of spies absolute. For Ying Zhang, these were years of silent, seething observation. He attended court, a small figure on a giant throne, saying little. He learned to read the micro-expressions of the ministers, the flicker of greed, the tremor of fear. He saw how Lu Buwei manipulated them all with a combination of patronage, blackmail, and philosophical discourse. He had even commissioned a grand syncretic text, the Lushi Chunchu, to guide his rule. The boy king's education was in power's emptiness. He saw that the throne was not about wisdom or virtue, but about the control of networks, the elimination of rivals, and the projection of unshakable will. When he turned 22, coming of age, he moved with a swiftness that stunned the court. He did not argue. He did not negotiate. He excised. On plausible charges of conspiracy, he exiled Lai Buwei, who later drank poison. He confined his mother to a distant palace, crushing her faction. He arrested the powerful Laozi, his mother's new lover who had dared raise a rebellion, and had the man executed by being torn apart by chariots, a horrifying public demonstration of the price of overreaching. The boy king was gone. In his place stood the king of Qin, his face a mask of impassive stone. His first independent act was not a law or a conquest, but a series of calculated, ruthless amputations to his own court. He had learned the ultimate lesson. Before you can conquer the world, you must first make your own house a fortress, its corridors swept clean of any loyalty stronger than fear, any voice louder than your own. His childhood had been a silent masterclass in isolation and suspicion, and he graduated with honors, ready to apply those cold lessons to an entire continent. With the rival states crushed and their armies disbanded, the first emperor faced a subtler, more pervasive enemy: incomprehension. A tax decree written in the elegant, curling seal script of Qin was gibberish to a clerk in the far east of Qi, who knew only the angular bird worm script. A legal statute from Siaj looked like chicken scratches to a magistrate in Yan. The empire was unified in name, but its mind was a Tower of Babel, written in 100 different hands. Li Si, the chancellor, saw the problem with his usual crystalline logic. A single law requires a single tongue. A single tongue requires a single script. The emperor agreed. The task fell to Li Si himself, the master calligrapher. He did not create from nothing. He took the Qin seal script as his base, the script of the law, the script of victory, and began to simplify and standardize. He removed ornate flourishes, unified stroke order, and fixed the number of characters. He created the small seal script, but decrees are not enough. The new script needed apostles. So the empire's most skilled scribesmen, who could make a character breathe with beauty, were summoned to Xianyang. They were not asked to innovate. They were ordered to copy. For months, the only sound in the vast scriptorium hall was the whisper of brushes on silk and the soft tap of ink stones. They produced perfect, immutable models. These models were then carved onto stone steely tall, rectangular monoliths of granite. The stelae were erected in every major city, in every commandery capital. They stood in public squares, cold and permanent, the laws of Qin, and the very shape of the words themselves, frozen in stone for all to see and copy. Local magistrates were ordered to send their clerks to these stones. The clerks would spend days, weeks, painstakingly rubbing paper over the carvings, transferring the perfect characters onto their own sheets. They would then return to their counties and teach others. It was a cultural tsunami in slow motion, rolling out from stone centers across the land. The unification of the script was a conquest deeper than any battlefield victory. It did not just facilitate administration. It rewired thought. It meant a child in the southern jungles of Yu and a child on the northern steppes of Dai would henceforth learn the same mental architecture for justice, loyalty, and X. It created a shared intellectual space, a unified field for the empire's ideology to grow. The old, diverse scripts, each carrying the cultural memory and aesthetic of a lost kingdom, withered and died, like dialects swallowed by a national language. The first emperor understood, to rule minds, you must first rule the very symbols with which they think. Even as scribes standardized thought, a greater, more visceral standardization was etching itself across the very flesh of the land. The northern frontier had always been a bleeding wound, scoured by the raids of the Xiongnu horsemen, the whirlwind from the steppe. Previous states Qin, Zhao, Yan had built walls along their own borders, disparate ramparts of tamped earth and stone, stopping and starting with the old political maps. The first emperor looked at these fragments and saw not a defense, but a symbol of disunity. A unified empire needed a unified skin. The order was given: link them, fill the gaps. Make one continuous barrier from the deserts of the west to the sea cliffs of the east. The project dwarfed the Zhengguo Canal. It consumed generations. The workforce was a river of misery soldiers, convicts, conscripted peasants. The terrain was merciless. Knife-edge ridges, bitter deserts, trackless mountains. The sound was a geologic groan, the thud of millions of earth-filled baskets being passed hand over hand up mountain slopes. The crack of quarried stone, the whip cracks of overseers, the ceaseless moan of the wind through the unfinished battlements. Men died in avalanches, of exposure, of despair. Their bodies were often buried within the wall itself, becoming part of its substance, a grim reinforcement. It was said that for every li of wall, 1,000 men perished. The wall grew not just from earth and stone, but from compressed suffering. But as the gaps closed, a strange thing happened. The wall began to create what it defined. On one side, the ordered world of fields, laws, and script. On the other, the chaotic, windswept steppe. It became the ultimate legalist object, a clear, brutal line between the civilized and the barbarian, between the included and the excluded. It was not just a military barrier, it was a psychological rampart imprinting the idea of China as a bounded, defended space onto the consciousness of every person who lived within its shadow. When the last section was joined and beacon fires could theoretically pass a signal from one end of the empire to the other in a single day and night, it stood as the first emperor's ultimate testament, a monument not to keeping people in, but to drawing a line so emphatic, so physically overwhelming, that the very land itself would henceforth announce the reality of the unified empire. The wall was the empire's spine, its scar and its defining signature written across a continent. Deep beneath a mound of earth in the Lishan district, far from the clatter of the wall builders and the crackle of book bonfires, a different kind of army was being mustered. This one was silent, made of earth and fire. The first emperor, having unified the world of the living, turned his mind to the world of the dead. The old nobility had been buried with chariots, sacrificed horses, even entire retinues of strangled concubines and servants to serve them in the afterlife. But this was the old way wasteful, and worse, it depleted the state's human resources. The emperor's solution was a masterpiece of legalist substitution and megalomaniacal ambition. He would take an army of clay. In vast, hidden workshops, thousands of artisans and potters worked for decades. The air was thick with the smell of wet clay, kill smoke, and mineral pigments. The sound was the soft slap and scrape of hands on coils of earth, the click-tick of molds being fitted together, the roar of the tunnel kilns burning day and night. This was an army of individuals. No two faces were alike. Sculptors, using live soldiers as models, captured the specific set of a jaw, the fold of an eye, the hairstyle of a region. There were generals with serene, strategic calm and young archers with the taut anxiety of their first campaign. There were cavalrymen holding the reins of delicate, powerful clay horses. Every detail was rendered. The rivets on leather armor, the tread on boots, the patterns on arrow quivers. They were painted in lifelike colors, vivid vermilion tunics, indigo trousers, faces tinted with flesh-toned ochre. Then they were assembled in battle formation in vast, subterranean pits, ranked according to the precise military doctrines that had won the empire. This was not a monument to war, but to eternal control. The terracotta army was the ultimate administrative document. It was the first emperor's ledger of power translated into sculpture to be filed away in the underworld. It guaranteed that his authority, bureaucratic, militaristic, total, would continue uninterrupted beyond death. The clay soldiers would never desert, never mutiny, never grow old. They were the perfect, obedient subjects of a ruler who could not conceive of an eternity where he did not command. The dream was not of an afterlife of peace, but of an eternal Qin, ruled forever by its immutable, terracotta-hearted emperor. As the terracotta army stood guard over his future death, the emperor became obsessed with defeating death itself. The unified empire was his body. He wished it to be immortal. Court alchemists and magicians, the Fangxi, whispered of lands beyond the eastern sea, where mountains of jade pierced clouds of immortality. They spoke of Penglai, the blissful isle where the Z mushroom of eternal life grew. The emperor, the supreme rationalist who standardized axles and script, succumbed to the most ancient of dreams. He dispatched expeditions. Great ships laden with grain, silk, and 3,000 virgin boys and girls, a gift for the immortals, sailed from the coast of Kui into the mist. None returned. Undeterred, he sent a court magician, Sun Tzu, on a greater mission. Sun Tzu was a shrewd man. He understood the emperor's thirst was a bottomless well from which he could drink funding forever. He returned from his first voyage with tales of a great sea monster guarding the approaches to Penglai. He needed crossbowmen to clear the path. The emperor gave them to him. Sun Tzu sailed again with an even larger fleet, more treasure, more young people. This time he vanished forever. Legends say he found the Japanese archipelago and ruled there, a cunning man who traded the terror of a tyrant for the founding of a new kingdom. Back in Xianyang, the emperor grew paranoid. The elixir was always just out of reach, a conspiracy of the universe. He took mercury pills prescribed by alchemists, believing it would purify his body. The heavy metal seeped into his bones, bringing delusions and agony. He traveled the empire in a closed carriage, his movements secret, searching for the mountain of mushrooms, leaving behind stone stele proclaiming his virtue to heaven, as if he could bargain with the cosmos for more time. The quest for the elixir was the tragic flaw in the legalist masterpiece. The mind that could organize a continent could not organize its own mortality. The fear of the end made him erratic, cruel, vulnerable to charlatans. The very obsession with perpetual control sowed the seeds of chaos, as succession planning was ignored in favor of alchemical fantasies. The empire's immortal body was being poisoned by the desperate, decaying heart of its creator. The mercury was a slow fire in his veins. The great tours, meant to display his godlike presence to the empire, became a feverish, shambling retreat from death. In the summer of 210 BCE, the imperial procession was returning to the capital, a miles-long serpent of chariots, cavalry, and officials winding through the dusty heart of the empire. The first emperor was dying inside his lavish, enclosed carriage. The stink of illness fought with the scent of sandalwood. His skin, once the color of polished bronze, was a waxy yellow. The tremors from the mercury poisoning made his hands dance like dying spiders on the silk covers. He knew the ultimate administrator faced the one ledger he could not balance, the one law he could not decree away. In the grim, sand-blown outpost of Shakyu sand dune, he could go no further. His closest attendant was the chief eunuch, Zhao Gao, a man of terrifying intelligence and serpentine ambition. Zhao Gao had mastered the empire's bureaucracy from the inside. He could recite every law, manipulate every procedure, and he saw his chance. With the emperor slipping in and out of consciousness, only 3 other men were in the know: the Prime Minister Laozi, the emperor's younger son Hu Hai, a weak and pliable youth favored by Zhao Gao, and a trusted captain of the guard. The emperor, with a final, rattling breath, dictated a letter. It was to be sent to his eldest son and heir, the Prince Fusu, who was stationed on the northern frontier with the great general Meng Tian. The message was simple: return to Xianyang and oversee my funeral. It was the succession order. He sealed it with the imperial seal, the Hishibi, a piece of legendary jade that read, "Having received the mandate from heaven, may the emperor lead a long and prosperous life." Then he died. A profound, terrifying silence filled the carriage. The greatest power on earth was now a cooling corpse. Outside, the empire slept, unaware its heart had stopped. Zhao Gao looked at the sealed letter, then at the weak-willed Hai, then at the powerful, pragmatic Li Si. He spoke, his voice a venomous whisper. "The emperor is dead. The letter goes to Fusu. Fusu is close to Meng Tian and the army. If he becomes emperor, you, Li Si, will be cast aside, and you, Prince Hai, will be nothing. Perhaps you will even be invited to join your father in the afterlife." He laid out the alternative: destroy the emperor's last letter, forge a new one. In this new decree, Fusu and Meng Tian would be accused of treason and ordered to commit suicide, and Hai would be named heir. Li Si, the great legalist, the architect of unity, faced his ultimate test. The law was clear. The emperor's word was absolute. But the emperor was dead. Should he follow the dead letter or seize the living opportunity? He thought of his life's work, the empire he helped build. He thought of his own power, his family's safety. The cold logic that had built Qin now justified its betrayal. He hesitated. Then He nodded. The conspiracy was sealed in the sweltering, death-filled carriage. The fate of the empire was decided not in a council hall, but in a whispered pact between a eunuch, a politician, and a coward, with the corpse of a god-king as their witness. They kept the death secret. The procession rolled on, the emperor's carriage still perfumed, meals still delivered to its door, decrees still issued in his name. But the mandate of heaven had already slipped from the dead man's grasp, stolen before it could be passed on. The machine was still running, but the operator was a ghost, and the new drivers were hurtling it toward a cliff. The forged edict, bearing the perfect imitation of the imperial seal, was placed in the hands of a trusted messenger. He rode with the desperation of a man carrying plague, north toward the Great Wall. He found Prince Fusu and General Meng Tian at their headquarters in Shangjun. The two men received the scroll in a Spartan command tent, the wind from the steppe moaning through its seams. Fusu unsealed it. The words were a cold blade to the heart. It accused them of years of failure on the frontier, of wasting resources, of harboring rebellious thoughts against the throne. The punishment, honor. They were to take their own lives. Meng Tian, a bear of a man with a soldier's directness, roared in disbelief. This is a trick. I have led 300,000 men. I hold the emperor's trust in my hand every day. I could rebel if I wished. Why would I need to conspire? This must be the work of traitors in the court. We must march to Xianyang and demand to see the emperor. He was ready to turn the armies south, to cleanse the capital with the very swords that guarded the frontier. But Fusu, the crown prince, was different. He had been raised in the Confucian ideals. His father despised filial piety, respect for the father's word, even from beyond the grave. He looked at the edict, at the seal he had seen 1,000 times. His father's will, however cruel, was absolute law. To question it was to become the rebel the letter accused him of being. Tears streamed down his face. "If my father commands me to die," he said, his voice breaking, "then I must die. To disobey a father's order, even if he is mistaken, is to be unfilial. To lead an army against the imperial seal is to be disloyal. I cannot be both." Meng Tian pleaded, argued, begged. But Fusu's mind was a prison of duty. He took a sword, went into an inner chamber, and ended his life. Meng Tian, now alone, was disarmed. His legitimacy had been tied to the prince. With Fusu dead by his own guilty hand, the general's position was untenable. Reluctantly, despairingly, he allowed himself to be disarmed and imprisoned to await further judgment. He would later be executed in his cell, a great defender of the empire, murdered by a piece of paper and a stamp of fake jade. The fake edict succeeded because it exploited the very pillars of the system it betrayed: blind obedience to the symbol of authority and the paralyzing virtue of filial piety. The two men who could have saved the Qin Dynasty died not on a battlefield, but in the trap of their own beliefs, proving that the empire, as greatest strength, its rigid hierarchy and unquestioning discipline, could also be the poison that stopped its own heart. The empire, built on terror and precision, began to shudder. The great projects, the wall, the roads, the tomb, the palaces, had drained the land of men and grain. Taxes were crushing. The law was a net of steel, catching the smallest fault with terrible punishment. The air in the villages grew thick with a silent, simmering desperation. In the county of Days, in the old land of Sichu, where resentment of Qin ran deepest, the rain failed. The harvest was a dust bowl. The tax collectors came anyway, their measures exact, their faces blank. A peasant named Chun Sheng, a hired hand with a fierce intelligence in his eyes, and his friend Wu Guang, a big strong man, were leading 900 conscripts through the pelting rain to a garrison on the northern frontier. The rain turned the roads to quagmires. They would never arrive on time. Qin law was clear. Failure to report for duty on the appointed day was punishable by death. The men huddled under dripping trees, their spirits as waterlogged as their clothes. Chun Sheng turned to Wu Guang. "We are dead men," he said, his voice low. "If we run, we die. If we go, we die for being late. Since we must die, why not die for a great cause?" That night, in the belly of a fish caught from a swollen stream, a soldier found a strip of silk. On it, in bold characters, were the words, "Chun Sheng will be king." The men murmured in superstitious awe. Then, from the dark woods near the camp, a voice cried out in a fox's uncanny screech, "Great seers will rise again. Chun Sheng will be king." It was a cheap trick, a shameless piece of theater, but it worked. The men, terrified of the state and hungry for any hope, any sign from heaven, believed. Chun Sheng stood before them on a muddy bank. He was not a noble. He wore rags, but his voice carried the raw, angry truth of their lives. Noblemen, marquises, chancellors, ministers. Do these titles come from birth? He shouted into the rain. No, the word was a lightning crack. It shattered the central lie of the age. If the first emperor, the son of heaven, could be toppled from his horse by a single arrow, Chun Sheng cried, pointing a shaking finger at the sky, then why not us? Why should we accept our fate? Are we not men? Are our lives not our own? It was the Jizexiang uprising, not a rebellion of lords, but of dirt-poor peasants, armed with hoes and anger. They had no strategy, no training, but they had a truth more powerful than any Qin army, the refusal to accept a death sentence for being late in the rain. They seized the local town. They killed the Qin magistrates. Word spread like wildfire across the dry kindling of the empire. 1,000 other Chun Shengs rose in 100 other counties. The cry was not for a philosophy, not for a lost king, but for simple, brutal survival. The perfect legalist machine, which had calculated everything except the breaking point of the human spirit, had finally manufactured its own most efficient destroyer, a desperate man with nothing left to lose. The angry cry in the rain was the sound of the foundation cracking. As the peasant fires raged in the east, two great predators of the fallen Qin circled each other in the west. Liu Bang, a former petty official turned rebel general, sly and pragmatic, had taken the Qin capital Xianyang first. He had promised its people peace, sealed the treasury, and waited. His rival, Xiang Yu, the aristocratic heir to a CHU general, a man of titanic strength and volcanic temper, arrived with an army 40 times larger. He was furious at being beaten to the prize. Xiang Yu camped at Hong Gate, just outside Xianyang. He planned to annihilate Liu Bang at a feast the next day. Liu Bang's advisor, the razor-minded Zhang Liang, learned of the plot. That night he sought out Xiang Yu's uncle, Xiang Biao, an old friend. Over cups of warm wine, Zhang Liang spoke not of war, but of gratitude. "My master, Liu Bang, has never forgotten your past kindness. He holds the capital not for himself, but for the true hero, Xiang Yu. He wishes only to explain himself, To clear this tragic misunderstanding, Xiang Bai, swayed by flattery and old sentiment, rode through the night to Xiang Yu's camp and pleaded for Liu Bang's life. The hot-headed Xiang Yu, whose moods shifted like summer storms, agreed to hear him out. The next day's feast was a masterpiece of tension. The air in the tent was thick with the smell of roast meat and imminent murder. Xiang Yu's strategist, Fan Zhang, sat glaring, raising his jade pendant again and again, a signal to attack. Xiang Yu ignored him, drinking deeply, his eyes locked on the nervously smiling Liu Bang. Liu Bang performed the role of his life. He groveled with perfect sincerity. "I am a humble man from Pei. I could never rival the great glory of General Xiang. I entered the capital only to preserve it for you. Any mistake was born of ignorance, not disloyalty." Xiang Yu, his vanity stroked, began to believe him. The moment for the kill passed. Fan Zheng, in a fury, summoned the warrior Xiang Zhuang. "The general is too soft. Go in and perform a sword dance. Get close to Liu Bang and kill him during the dance." Xiang Zhuang entered, sword flashing. But Xiang Bio, now committed to his role as protector, rose too. "A solo dance is dull. Let me join you." He interposed his own body, his own sword, always blocking the fatal thrust, turning the murderous dance into a harmless, clashing spectacle. The feast at Hong Gate was a battle fought with cups, words, and dancing swords. Liu Bang won it by surrendering every shred of pride, by understanding that survival, not honor, was the only victory that mattered. He escaped the trap, leaving Xiang Yu to stew in his own indecision. The path to the empire would now be decided not just on battlefields, but in the treacherous perfumed space between raised wine cups and feigned smiles. While Zhuangzi mused on butterflies and butchers, a man of a diametrically opposite temperament was forging his will in fire and blood. Xiang Yu, having let Liu Bang slip through his fingers at Hong Gate, declared himself hegemon king of Western Sichuan. He now sought to break the last remnants of Qin resistance and cement his rule. He faced the main Qin army at the Battle of Julu. The Qin general Zhang Han had his troops supplied by a fleet on the Jiang River. Xiang Yu, in a move of breathtaking, suicidal audacity, ordered his men to cross the river and then burn their own boats. He broke all the cooking cauldrons. Each soldier was given only 3 days' rations. The sound was not a philosophy, but a finality. The shattering crash of pottery, the hiss of flaming timbers on water, the stunned silence of 20,000 men watching their only path home turn to ash and driftwood. Xiang Yu addressed them, his voice like grinding stones. "We have no retreat. Our only path is forward. Our only supplies are in the Qin camp. Our only life lies in victory within 3 days." It was the ultimate negation of Zhuangzi's Wu Wei. This was Wu Wei's violent inverse, the total, willful creation of a situation so desperate that flow was impossible, leaving only the stark binary of conquest or annihilation. There were no natural contours to follow, only a wall to smash through. The battle was a frenzy. Xiang Yu's trapped men fought like demons, their desperation a tangible force. They shattered the Qin lines, captured the supply fleet, and won a legendary victory. The breaking of the cauldrons entered history as the ultimate symbol of decisive win-or-die commitment. But in his triumph, Xiang Yu planted his own downfall. His method was that of the sublime butcher who hacks, not the cook Ding who finds the spaces. He won the battle by destroying his own means of sustenance and retreat. He could conquer, but he could not administer. He could break, but he could not build. He was a force of nature, a human avalanche, magnificent and ultimately barren. His victory at Julu was the peak from which his star would inevitably fall, because a star that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and leaves only cold ash where a garden might have grown. As Xiang Yu's hard-won hegemony began to fray under Liu Bang's relentless, insidious pressure, the two giants met for their final confrontation at Gaxia. Liu Bang, advised by the strategic genius Zhang Liang, had surrounded Xiang Yu's camp with a vast army, but he knew a direct assault against the peerless warrior king would be catastrophic. Instead, he waged a war of sound. As dusk fell, Liu Bang ordered the soldiers from Xiang Yu's homeland of Sichu to sing. They sang the folk songs of the villages along the Yangtze, the plaintive ballads of rice planting and love, the hearthside tunes every Sichu child knew. 10,000 voices lifted into the cold night air, the melodies drifting over the palisades into the besieged camp. Inside, Xiang Yu's troops, exhausted and far from home, heard the songs. The sound pierced their armor, their discipline, their will to fight. It spoke of winding rivers, of mothers waiting, of a life before endless war. Homesickness, a weapon Confucius or Mozi never conceived, washed over them in a tidal wave. Men dropped their spears and wept. They began to desert in the dark, slipping away toward the familiar melodies, their loyalty to a king dissolving in the deeper pull of ancestral soil and memory. Xiang Yu, in his tent, heard the singing. He knew what it meant. The greatest military mind of his age had been defeated not by a superior army, but by a choir. He drank heavily, and his beloved concubine, Consort Yu, danced for him one last time, her sword flickering in the lamplight like a captive firefly. Then he sang his own song, a line of stark, tragic poetry that echoed through the millennia. My strength plucked mountains, my spirit shadowed the world. Yet the times are against me, my war steed runs no more. When my war steed runs no more, what then can I do? Ah, you, my you, what will become of you? He broke out with a handful of loyal knights, fought his way to the banks of the Wu River, and there, refusing the shame of capture or retreat to a homeland he felt he had failed, he took his own life. The song of Chu was the final ironic lesson. The brute force that broke cauldrons could be undone by the soft power of a remembered melody. Xiang Yu, who lived by the sword, died by the song. Liu Bang, who understood that the heart was the ultimate battlefield, had won the empire not by breaking the enemy's army, but by unmaking his will using the very culture Xiang Yu fought to defend as the instrument of his destruction. It was a victory of profound, cunning harmony over magnificent, brittle force. Long before the songs at Gaxia, before the feast at Han Gate, the man who would engineer the Han Dynasty was not a general, but a scholar with a price on his head. Zhang Liang came from a noble family of the fallen state of Han. His life's purpose, born from the ashes of his homeland, was vengeance against the Qin. His first attempt was a disaster, a reckless, grave, and foolish assassination plot that failed. He became a fugitive, hiding in the marshes and backroads of the empire. One evening, exhausted and despondent, he walked across a narrow bridge over the Yi River. An old man in a rough hemp robe Sitting on the railing, deliberately let his shoe fall into the muddy water below. "Hey, boy," the old man barked, not looking at him. "Fetch my shoe." Zhang Liang, a nobleman by birth, stiffened, but something in the man's tone, an authority beyond station, gave him pause. Swallowing his pride, he climbed down, retrieved the filthy shoe, and handed it back. The old man held out his foot. "Put it on?" Again, Zhang Liang paused. Then, kneeling in the dirt of the riverbank, he carefully placed the shoe on the old man's foot. The man laughed, stood up, and walked away without a word of thanks. After a few paces, he turned. "You're worth teaching, boy. Meet me here at dawn in 5 days." Intrigued, Zhang Liang agreed. He arrived at dawn on the 5th day. The old man was already there, furious. "You meet an elder late? Come back in 5 days." Zhang Liang, chastened, returned 5 days later, arriving before the rooster's crow. The old man was again there first. Another scolding, another dismissal. The third time, Zhang Liang went to the bridge at midnight and waited in the cold dark. When the old man arrived at first light, he smiled. "This is the way." He handed Zhang Liang a bundle of bamboo strips. It was a book, The Art of War by Tai Gong, a legendary near-mythical text on strategy and statcraft. "Study this," the old man said, his voice now soft as the morning mist. "It will make you the teacher of kings. In 10 years, the world will be in upheaval. Use this to shape it." Then he vanished, never to be seen again. Zhang Liang spent the next decade in the wilderness, not as a fugitive, but as a student. He memorized the text, not just the tactics, but the philosophy, the supremacy of planning over fighting, of psychology over force, of winning the war before the first battle. When the Dazexiang uprising sparked, he emerged not as a vengeful noble, but as the coolest, most far-seeing mind of the age. He attached himself to Liu Bang, not because Liu was the strongest, but because he was the most teachable. While others sought land and titles, Zhang Liang sought only to implement the book. He was the architect of the Hong Gate escape, the coalition builder, the advisor who always saw 3 moves ahead on a board others didn't even know was a game. He was the living embodiment of the lesson from the bridge. True power begins not with action, but with humility, patience, and the willingness to receive wisdom from the most unlikely sources. Even a cantankerous old man with a muddy shoe. His strategies were the needle that stitched the torn empire back together, guided by the moonlight text given on a riverbank. We return to the end. The CHU songs have done their work. Xiang Yu's camp is a ghost of its former self, echoing with the sobs of the homesick and the silent despair of those who remain. He makes his last stand not as a king, but as a cornered tiger. The battle is less a clash of armies than a liquidation. Liu Bang's forces, orchestrated by the cold calculus of his general Han Xin, advance in relentless, disciplined formations. There is no glory here, only procedure. Xiang Yu, a whirlwind of doomed fury, cuts down hundreds. His famous spear, a blur of silver and blood. But for every man he fells, 10 more step forward. He is not fighting an army. He is trying to hold back the tide with a shovel. He breaks through the encirclement with only 28 horsemen. They ride hard, a final, desperate bolt of lightning across the darkening plain. At the Wu River, a local boatman waits, offering him escape back to the heartland of Siachu, where he might raise another army. Xiang Yu looks at the boat, then back at the few battered, loyal men who have followed him to the end. He laughs, a sound bitter as gall. When I crossed the river westward with 8,000 sons of the east, not one returned. What would their fathers and brothers say if I returned now, alone? What face could I show them? He refuses the boat. He turns his small band and charges one last time into the pursuing Han cavalry, carving a final, bloody poem of defiance into the afternoon. He is wounded over and over. Knowing the end has come, he sees an old acquaintance among the Han officers. I hear Liu Bang has put a price of 1,000 caddies of gold and a fief of 10,000 households on my head. Let me do you a favor. With that, the hegemon king of Western Chu, the man who broke cauldrons and shook the heavens, takes his own sword and falls upon it. His death is not a silence. It is a vacuum. The age of the heroic individual warrior king, the aristocrat who led from the front and lived by a personal code of honor, dies with him. The Han soldiers in a frenzy tear his body apart to claim the reward, a final, grotesque indignity that underscores the new era's values: utility over honor, reward over loyalty, the system over the man. The defeat at Gaixia is more than a military loss. It is the closing of a chapter of human history. The future belongs to men like Liu Bang and Zhang Lian, pragmatists, planners, survivors. The river that Zhuangzi observed, which could be floated upon or struggled against, has now been dammed, canalized, and measured for irrigation by a new breed of men. The dream of the butterfly is over. The age of the administrator has begun. Years before the final confrontation, the rivalry between Liu Bang and Xiang Yu had been a chess game of shifting alliances and broken promises. The true strategic pivot, however, was not a battle, but a river crossing. The scene was the Yellow River, the temperamental, silt-choked artery of the North China Plain. Liu Bang, having been granted the remote and poor lands of Hanzhong by Xian Yu, a deliberate insult, needed to move east to challenge for the heartland. Between him and his goal was the colossal figure of Xiang Yu, who was busy putting down rebellions in the northern state of Kui. Liu Bang's general, the legendary Han Xin, stood on the river's western bank. The opposing army, led by a competent Qin Dynasty holdout general, waited on the eastern side, confident behind the river's broad, muddy width. A direct assault across the water would be suicide. Han Xin spent days in plain sight, having his men gather timber, build rafts, and make a great show of preparing for a crossing at the obvious shallow ford. The enemy general concentrated his forces there, watching the busy activity. Then, one moonless night, Han Xin moved, but not at the ford. He took his main force upstream to a place where the river ran deep and fast, deemed impassable. Here, his men had secretly prepared. They filled thousands of sandbags. Silently, in the cold, rushing dark, they waded into the torrent, holding the bags above their heads to create a precarious human-weighted submerged dam. The water level downstream at the ford dropped dramatically, just enough to turn a deep channel into a wadable passage. Han Xin left a small contingent to maintain the illusion of activity at the original site. With the bulk of his army, he crossed the suddenly shallow ford under cover of darkness. He fell upon the enemy camp from an unexpected direction at dawn, while they were still staring at the decoy rafts. The battle was a rout. This was the Battle of Jinxing, the Well Pass. It was a victory won not by strength of arms, but by hydroengineering and misdirection. Han Xin understood the terrain better than the enemy. He didn't fight the river. He used it as a tool, a component in his strategy as vital as any soldier. The victory opened the eastern plains to Liu Bang. More importantly, it established a template. Han Xin's genius was one of applied geometry and psychology. He won battles by changing the physical and mental landscape, backing armies against rivers, feigning retreats to lure enemies into chaos, using the very expectations of his opponents as weapons against them. It was the Cook Ding of warfare, finding the spaces in the enemy's formation and the terrain, applying minimal, perfect force. The river that decided the empire taught that the greatest general was not the strongest fighter, but the most perceptive reader of land, water, and the human mind. The wars were over. Xian Yu was dead. The peasant rebel Liu Bang stood atop the bloody mountain of contending kings. In 202 BCE, he was proclaimed Emperor Gaozu of the Han Dynasty. The coronation was not in the scorched ruins of the magnificent Qin capital, Xianyang. He chose a new site nearby, Chang'an, perpetual peace. The symbolism was clear, a fresh start. The first act of the new Son of Heaven was not a grand decree, but a simplification. He entered the court wearing plain robes of undyed hemp, a stark contrast to the elaborate silks and intimidating black regalia of the first emperor. His ministers, many of them rough-edged comrades from his rebel days, were baffled. "We have won the empire on horseback," one of them grumbled. "Why all this fuss about rituals and robes?" A scholar who had survived the Qin purges, Lu Jia, answered, "Your Majesty, you may have won it on horseback, but can you rule it from horseback?" The question hung in the air. Liu Bang, the ultimate pragmatist, understood. Brute force could conquer, but only civil order could sustain. Yet he was deeply suspicious of the complex, stifling rituals of the Qin and the Zhou before them. His solution was a brilliant, messy synthesis, the Han synthesis. He kept the strong, centralized bureaucratic framework of the Qin, its systems of administration and law. But he peeled away the harsh legalist fanaticism. The draconian punishments were relaxed, taxes were reduced. He searched for the surviving scholars of the old philosophies, inviting them to court. Most importantly, he turned to the teachings that emphasized social harmony, Confucianism, but it was a practical, stripped-down Confucianism. He needed its emphasis on loyalty, filial piety, and hierarchy to stabilize a society shattered by war, but he rejected its more arcane rituals. He needed the Taoist idea of resting with the people, lightening their burdens so the land could heal. The emperor in plain robes set the tone. The Han would not be a terrifying machine like the Qin. It would be a household, with the emperor as a stern but caring patriarch, ruling through a blend of Qin efficiency and Confucian morality. It was an experiment. Could an empire be run with a lighter touch? Could the mandate of heaven be maintained not through terror, but through benevolence and pragmatic order? The plain robes were a promise to a weary world. The age of the sword was over. The age of the plow and the scroll had begun. Emperor Gaozu's early reign was tested not by internal rebels, but by a sound from the northern winds, the thunder of Zhongnu horse archers. These steppe nomads, unified under the fierce Modu Chanyu, wear a whirlwind of leather and lacquer, shooting arrows from horseback with a skill the Han infantry could not match. In a disastrous battle, Laozi himself was surrounded and nearly captured, saved only by a haze of fog and clever bribery. The humiliating lesson was clear. The Han could not defeat the Xiongnu on the open plain, but war was ruinously expensive. The treasury, bled dry by the civil wars, was empty. The legalist answered total war, had built the Qin and then destroyed it. A new strategy was needed. A courtier named Lo Jing proposed a radical, distasteful, and brilliant solution. Hecken, the peace and kinship policy. Great Emperor, he said, we cannot fight them. Let us marry them. Send a princess of the imperial family, a daughter or a cousin, to become a wife to the Chanyu. With her send annual gifts, bolts of silk, vessels of wine, sacks of rice, and jars of honey. The court was scandalized. Sending a Han princess to live in a felt tent among barbarians was a profound humiliation. But Gaozu, the pragmatist, listened. Liu Jing continued, the Chanyu will become your son-in-law. His son, half Han, will be your grandson. When the Chanyu dies, your grandson will be Chanyu. What grandfather goes to war against his grandson? What son-in-law raids his father-in-law's lands? We will transform them from enemies into family through silk and marriage. The policy was adopted. The first princess, often a court lady given the title, embarked on the long journey north with a caravan that was both a dowry and a tribute. The Xiongnu, who valued practical wealth over abstract prestige, were delighted. The silk was not just fabric, it was currency. In the vast trading networks of Central Asia, Han silk could buy anything Turkestani jade, Persian glass, Indian spices, and most importantly, more of the fierce steppe horses the Han lacked. The Hecken policy was a masterstroke of economic and biological statcraft. It bought decades of fragile peace on the northern frontier, allowing the Han to recover and rebuild. It created a conduit for trade and cultural exchange, the embryonic Silk Road. It acknowledged a hard truth. Sometimes the strongest fortress is not a wall, but a marriage alliance. The most effective army is not a legion, but a caravan of silks that turns an enemy's greed into a bond of mutual, if uneasy, dependence. Under the peaceful reign of Emperor Wu, the great-grandson of Gaozu, the Han synthesis flourished. But synthesis requires memory. Someone had to record the cataclysm that birthed the dynasty, to make sense of the bones upon which their peace was built. That man was Sima Qian, appointed grand historian by his father. His life's work was to write the Shiji, the records of the grand historian, a history of all known civilization from the Yellow Emperor to his own day. His work was a monument of impartiality. He praised the first emperor's achievements while condemning his cruelty. He recorded Xiang Yu's heroism and his flaws with equal fidelity. He was completing this vast tapestry when disaster struck. He defended a general, Li Ling, who had surrendered to the Xiongnu after a heroic last stand. Emperor Wu, seeing surrender as the ultimate disgrace, flew into a rage. Sima Qian was sentenced to death. In Han law, death could be commuted by payment of a vast fine or by undergoing castration. Sima Qian was not a wealthy man. His friends, terrified, abandoned him. He stood in his cold cell facing the choice, an honorable death or a living mutilation that would make him a laughingstock, an outcast from the society of men. He thought of his unfinished history. If I die now, he wrote later in a desperate letter to a friend, my work will be like a pile of refuse, discarded by the world. The true gentleman keeps his death for a meaningful purpose. He chose the knife. He submitted to the humiliating, painful punishment and lived. He returned to his scrolls, a broken man in body, but with a spirit forged in a fire of unbearable pain. His history became something more than a record. It became a judgment. His prose gained a searing, tragic power. He wrote of heroes and villains not as myths, but as complex, flawed humans. He invented the biographical form, letting cooks, assassins, merchants, and jesters share the stage with kings. Working by lamplight in the silent archives, the smell of ink and old bamboo around him, Sima Qian did not just record history. He gave it a soul. His own suffering became the lens through which he understood the suffering of the ages. The Shiji became his revenge and his redemption proof that a man who had lost everything in the eyes of the world could yet create something immortal. He taught the Han and all who came after that true power lies not in the edicts of an emperor, but in the hand of the historian who, from the darkness, decides what will be remembered and how. For centuries, knowledge had been carved into bone, cast into bronze, written on slivers of bamboo tied with string, or painted on priceless silk. The Shiji of Sima Qian alone filled cartloads of heavy bamboo strips, a fortune in writing material and a beast to store and transport. In the imperial workshops of Lusang, amidst the clang of metalsmiths and the hum of weavers, a minor eunuch official named Tai Lun oversaw the production of instruments and supplies. He was a practical man, attentive to waste and process. He watched the rag pickers and hemp processors, saw the leftover fibers and scraps that were considered useless. Driven by an imperial decree to find cheaper writing materials, he began to experiment. He took bark from mulberry trees, old hemp rags, fishnets, and bits of cloth. He boiled them into a pulpy mush, beating them against stone mortar until the fibers separated. He suspended this mash in vats of water, then dipped a fine mesh screen into the slurry, lifting it out with a thin, even layer of intertwined fibers. He pressed out the water, let it dry in the sun, and peeled it off. What emerged was not bamboo, not silk. It was a new substance, thin, flexible, surprisingly strong, and thirsty for ink. He called it Z paper. The first sheets were coarse, flecked with imperfect fibers, but Cai Lun refined the process. He added different materials, perfected the consistency of the pulp, improved the screens. He presented his best samples to Emperor Yi of Han. The court was skeptical. It seemed flimsy, common. But when a scribe took a brush and wrote upon it, the ink did not bleed like on cheap cloth, nor was it unyielding like bamboo. It accepted the stroke with a gentle whisper, holding the character with crisp clarity. The cost was a fraction of silk. The invention did not roar into the world. It seeped. First, it was used for trivial palace records, for packaging, for drafting documents that would later be transcribed onto bamboo. But its potential was immense. For the first time, thought could be captured on a medium that was light, cheap, and reproducible. A scholar could carry a library in his satchel. Decrees could be copied by the thousand and dispatched across the empire without bankrupting the treasury. Paper was the quiet, physical foundation upon which the Han synthesis could truly spread. The philosophies, the histories, the laws, the poetry all could now travel on the breath of a donkey, reaching magistrates in far provinces, scholars in humble schools. Cai Lun, the workshop manager, had not won a battle or written a poem, but by turning rags into a receptacle for mind, He had built a conduit for civilization itself, wider and more durable than any canal or wall. The scratch of the scribe's pen on this new surface was the sound of an idea being set free. Emperor Wu, grandson of the pragmatic Laozi, was a ruler of a different temper. The Heckin policy of buying peace with silk chafed his imperial pride. He dreamed not of containing the Xiongnu, but of destroying them. To do that, he needed allies. Rumors spoke of a great wandering people far to the west, the Yuezhi, who had been defeated by the Xiongnu and bore them a bitter hatred. In 138 BCE, the emperor summoned a courtier known for his resolve and resourcefulness, Zhang Qian. His mission: travel beyond the known world, find the Yuezhi, and bring them back as allies in a grand pincer attack against the Xiongnu. It was a mission of near-certain death. Zhang Qian set out with a retinue of 100 men, including a Xiongnu guide named Ganfu. They passed beyond the Yumenguan, the Jade Gate, the last fortified outpost of Han civilization. The world changed. The ordered fields gave way to the Gobi Desert, a realm of shifting sands, blistering sun by day, and bone-cracking cold by night. The sound was no longer of human industry, but of the ceaseless, moaning wind sculpting dunes into endless frozen waves. They were captured almost immediately by a Xiongnu patrol. Zhang Qian was taken before a Xiongnu prince. Instead of killing him, the prince, intrigued by his dignity, made him a slave. He gave Zhang Qian a Xiongnu wife, lands to tend, integrating him into the nomadic life. For 10 years, Zhang Qian lived as a captive, herding sheep, learning the Xiongnu language and ways, but never forgetting his emperor's command. He kept his Han officer's seal hidden in the lining of his felt coat. When vigilance relaxed, he escaped with his wife, Ganfu, and a handful of loyal men. They didn't turn back to Han. They pressed west, driven by a sense of duty that had become the core of his being. They skirted the Serene Basin, survived the Taklamakan Desert, its name meaning, "You go in, you don't come out," and finally reached the fertile valley of Fergana, and then the Greco-Bactrian kingdom of Diwan. He found the Yuezhi, but they had settled in rich, new lands. They had no desire to march back east to wage a vengeful war. Zhang Qian's primary mission had failed. Yet his journey was a staggering success of discovery. He returned to Chang'an after 13 years, having traveled over 8,000 miles. Only he and Ganfu survived from the original party. He brought back not an army, but information, detailed accounts of 36 Western kingdoms, their customs, products, and military strength. He described the heavenly horses of Fergana, larger and stronger than any in the East. He described grapes, alfalfa, pomegranates. He reported a vast trade network linking the East to Persia, India, and even a distant empire called Lycian, possibly Rome. Emperor Wu listened, his strategic mind alight. The Yuezhi alliance was forgotten. What Zhang Qian had unveiled was something greater, a world beyond the Xiongnu, a world that could be traded with, learned from, and used to outflank the nomads economically and politically. Zhang Qian's failed diplomatic mission became the founding act of the Silk Road. He proved that the greatest strength is sometimes not in alliance, but in knowledge, in the map that replaces the unknown with possibility, turning a defensive frontier into a gateway to a wider world. Emperor Wu was captivated not by Zhang Qian's tales of grapes, but by his description of the heavenly horses from the kingdom of Diwan, Fergana, in modern Uzbekistan. These were not the sturdy, shaggy ponies of the steppe. They were tall, sleek, and powerful, with hides that were said to sweat blood, a phenomenon likely caused by a parasite. To a cavalry-obsessed emperor locked in a mortal struggle with the Xiongnu horsemen, these animals were not mere steeds. They were a strategic weapon, the key to cavalry supremacy. He sent an embassy laden with gold and a statue of a golden horse, a symbolic request for the heavenly breeds. The king of Diyuan, protective of his prized assets and confident in his distance from hand power, refused. He mocked the envoys, seized the gold, and had them killed on their journey home. The insult was a casus belli that perfectly suited Emperor Wu's ambitions. In 104 BCE, he dispatched a vast army under General Li Guangli on a punitive expedition across 2,000 miles of the harshest terrain on Earth, the Taklamakan Desert, and the Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world. It was less a military campaign than a geographic ordeal. Men died of thirst, heat, and altitude sickness before even seeing an enemy. The first expedition was a disastrous failure, turning back with over half its men lost. Emperor Wu, his pride now utterly committed, would not relent. He sent a second, even larger force. This army, hardened by suffering and driven by imperial will, finally reached the green Fergana Valley. They laid siege to the Dayuan capital. The siege was brutal, but the decisive moment came not from a battering ram, but from a well. Han engineers, skilled from canal and mining projects, diverted the city's water source. Parched and desperate, the Dayuan nobles turned on their own king, killed him, and offered the terms of surrender: all the heavenly horses the Han army could select, and an annual tribute of horses henceforth. Li Guangli agreed. He chose the best 3,000 steeds and began the long, triumphant march home. The cost was astronomical in men and treasure. But when the first of the tall, spirited Fergana horses pranced into the imperial stables at Chang'an, Emperor Wu saw only victory. He had done what was considered impossible, projected Han power to the very edge of the known world to seize a living trophy. The heavenly horses became a symbol of Han might, their bloodlines forever altering East Asian cavalry. The campaign proved that the Han would no longer just defend or negotiate. They would reach across continents to seize the tools of dominance, no matter the price. It was the ultimate expression of relentless, expansive will. The early Han had ruled with a light touch, a blend of Taoist non-interference and pragmatic legalist administration. But by the reign of Emperor Wu, the empire was rich, strong, and restless. The simple synthesis was no longer enough. The emperor wanted an official ideology, a state philosophy to unify thought, as his armies had unified territory. He summoned a grand debate, the banquet of 100 scholars, to his court. The great hall buzzed with representatives of every surviving school: white-bearded Confucians in precise robes, Taoists in simple hemp, remnants of the Mohist logicians, legalists with their cold eyes, even cosmologists and yin-yang theorists. For days they argued. The Taoists spoke of effortless rule, of following the way. The legalists spoke of clear laws and severe punishments. The Mohists spoke of universal love and efficient defense. But one Confucian scholar, Dong Zhongshu, stood apart. He was not a mere traditionalist. He had reinvented Confucianism for a new age. He presented a grand cosmic vision. He spoke of the unity of heaven, earth, and man. The emperor, as the son of heaven, was the pivotal link in this cosmic chain. Social disorder, rebellions, floods, eclipses was a sign of the emperor's moral failing, throwing the cosmic balance into disarray. Therefore, he argued, the emperor must rule with virtue to maintain heavenly harmony. But this virtue was not vague. It was to be expressed through a Confucian moral order, the three bonds, ruler-subject, father-son, husband-wife, and the five constants, benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, faithfulness. This provided a divine sanction for hierarchy. Emperor Wu was enthralled. Here was a philosophy that gave his absolute power a moral and cosmic purpose, while also providing a detailed, stabilizing social blueprint. It condemned the Qin's brutal legalism as a cause of cosmic imbalance, while appropriating its centralized state structure. At the banquet's end, Emperor Wu issued an edict. He elevated Confucianism to the state orthodoxy. Other schools were not banned with fire, as in Qin, but were sidelined. Official posts and the Imperial Academy would now favor men trained in the Confucian classics, interpreted through Dong Jiangqu's grand synthesis. The banquet of 100 scholars did not end in a true debate. It ended in a coronation of an idea. Dong Jiangqu's version of Confucianism became the operating system of the Chinese state for the next 2 millennia. It fused morality with politics, cosmology with bureaucracy. The empire now had its soul, a soul that preached harmony but justified authority, that spoke of heaven's will while serving the emperor's court. The 100 voices were silenced, merged into one authoritative hum that would echo through the halls of power forever after. With Confucianism enshrined as the state orthodoxy, a profound, silent transformation began in the everyday machinery of the empire. It was no longer enough to have laws. The laws now had to breathe with ritual. In the Ministry of Justice, a new kind of document appeared. A legal case concerning, for example, a son who struck his father was no longer judged solely on the Qin-era statute. Strike a parent, behead. The Confucian-trained magistrate would now unfurl a scroll of the classic of filial piety alongside the legal code. His judgment would cite both the statute and the canonical text, weaving them together. The punishment might still be severe, but the justification had changed. It was no longer just a breach of public order, legalist, but a rupture in the cosmic human hierarchy, an offense against heaven itself, Confucian. The law became a moral parable. In the countryside, the local San Lao, the 3 elders, appointed by the state, were no longer just tax collectors and enforcers. They were now also moral exemplars. Their duty was to model the Confucian virtues, to settle village disputes not merely with a ruling, but with a lesson drawn from the odes or the rites. The annual community drinking ceremony, a revived Zhou ritual, became a tool of statecraft. Villagers would gather, and elders would publicly praise the virtuous and censure the wayward, all according to the state-sanctioned Confucian script. Good behavior was rewarded with ceremonial cups of wine. Bad behavior met with solemn, shaming silence. This unification was most visible in the imperial examinations. Under Emperor Wu, a system began to take shape where young men from across the empire, initially from well-to-do families, could come to the capital to be tested. The test was not on military strategy or legalist statutes. It was on the 5 Confucian classics. To become a government official, one had to master the poetry, history, and philosophy that embodied the state ideology. The bureaucracy became self-replicating. staffed by men who had internalized a fusion of ritual and authority through years of memorization and commentary. The sound of governance changed. It was no longer the stark clang of the legalist gavel, but the measured, sonorous recitation of a classical text in a courtroom, the murmuring of students memorizing the rites in county schools, the formalized greetings of officials steeped in ceremonial propriety. The state had successfully internalized its own ideology. The external coercion of Qin was replaced by a subtler, more pervasive power, the power of internalized orthodoxy. People learned to govern themselves according to the rituals the state had deemed correct. The unification of ritual and law was the final masterful stroke of the Han synthesis, the creation of a system where the most effective law was the one people believed was right, and the most powerful ritual was the one that upheld the state. Centuries pass. The Han Dynasty, like all things under heaven, waxes and wanes and finally falls. Empires rise and crumble. The Jin, the Sui, the Tang, the Song, the Ming, the Qing. Dynasties change their names, their capitals, their borders. Yet in the quiet courtyard of a magistrate's yamen in a remote province, a sound persists. It is the sound of a magistrate's wooden gavel, toque, striking his desk. But following it is not a roar of guards, but the low, calm voice of the official, quoting a passage from the Analects or the Zhou Li to explain his judgment to the peasants kneeling before him. It is the sound of students in an academy, chanting in unison the very same classics memorized in Han times. It is the whisper of a historian, brush in hand, consciously emulating the biographical form pioneered by Sima Qian. The first emperor's walls crumble. His terracotta army is buried and forgotten. His standardized axles turn to dust. But the patterns set in motion during those 4 centuries of turmoil and synthesis, from the Warring States philosophers to the Han unifiers, become the deep grammar of Chinese civilization. The legalist framework of a strong, centralized, bureaucratic state endures. The Confucian moral order, with its emphasis on hierarchy, education, and social harmony, becomes the empire's enduring soul. The Taoist critique of excess remains a vital counterpoint, a philosophy of retirement and natural balance. Even the Mohist concern for universal welfare and the strategist's art of psychological warfare find their niches. The story does not end. It reverberates. Each dynasty faces its own version of the old dilemmas: order versus freedom, central control versus local adaptation, moral virtue versus practical power. They all return, in some form, to the wellspring of ideas forged in the crucible of ancient chaos. The peasants cry for justice. The scholars debate on statcraft, the engineer's canal, the historian's lonely vigil, the unification of script and thought. These are not merely events of the past. They are echoes in the courtyard of history, repeating, evolving, but always recognizable. The Han synthesis proved that an empire could be more than a machine of conquest. It could be an organism of culture, capable of adapting, absorbing, and enduring. And so, as our long journey from the warm wind after the ice to the unified empire settles into the quiet of your own mind, remember this: the most enduring conquests are not of land, but of ideas. The most powerful walls are not of stone, but of shared belief. And the true mandate of heaven is not a single ruler's privilege, but the endless, patient, human struggle to find balance between the 2 breaths, the yin of yielding harmony and the yang of forceful order in an ever-changing world. The story is told. The echoes fade into silence. Let the deep peace of time itself now carry you into rest. Sleep.